All right. Welcome to the broadcast, everyone. Hope you can hear me all right. Just drop something in the comments if you're having any audio issues or any video issues. You should be seeing myself, Ryan, and James on the left side of your screen, and you should see the presentation. Take the majority of the screen on the right side. We'll go ahead and get started in a few minutes. I'm just going to let people come in to the live streams. Hope everybody's doing good today. We're very excited to have James here today. James has been an integral part of Web3 Texas, and he's been supporting us in the background. And honestly, he's in Ohio, so none of you have ever seen him. You may have never met him. You may have never even heard of James or what he does. So this is a perfect opportunity for James to showcase his expertise, his knowledge in the accessibility arena. Hey, there's Jonathan. Thanks for jumping on, Jonathan. And Ryan, you're on LinkedIn, right? You're monitoring LinkedIn for comments. Okay, thank you, sir. Hey, Jonathan, since you're on here, could you monitor Twitter for us, please? I believe you can make comments on Twitter. All right. Start in just a few minutes. Ryan, you got any words you'd like to say before we get started?
No, appreciate it. Thanks, James, for the presentation, and look forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. My name is Nick James. I am the founder of Web3 Texas. Today, we have with us James Warnkin. As I said a little bit earlier before the live stream started, James has been with us for quite a few number of months, and he's been working in the background. Sorry, just getting a little bit of feedback. So James has been with us for a few months now, and he's been working in the background. A lot of you may not actually know of him, who he is, or what he does. So this is a perfect opportunity for James to really advocate for accessibility in Web3. James, if you go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
So, it's this perfect slide because it talks about our mission statement, which is something that's very important to us. It's something we ground ourselves in each and every day. Each team member is encouraged to look back to the mission statement if at any point they're doubtful of what it is their purpose is here, we always go back to a mission statement. So simply it is to make Web3 accessible to all through multidimensional learning experiences and value-driven communities. Okay. Nested underneath multidimensional, there's three attributes, right? There is simplified, there's captivating, there's adaptive. And James is the entire body of work for James, who's our director of accessibility, is the adaptive attribute of our education. Not only for education, but for all technological platforms that we use internally and externally. James is in the background. He evaluates all of our platform selections. He is the final say in all of our platforms. Whether we use a platform or not comes down to James's decision. If we don't believe that it is currently accessible, or if we have not had a conversation with the manufacturer of the platform, let's say, for example, it's Slack, and they have not indicated any sort of roadmap plans to make it more accessible or have agreed to work with us to make it more accessible, we choose not to go with the platform. That's how important accessibility is to us. And James is an embodiment of that. James, next slide, please. Okay, just want to remind everybody, Web3 Texas is an assumed name for our nonprofit. And the name of our nonprofit is called Web3 Earth. And it probably indicates some larger plans in the works. But just a reminder, if you like what we're doing, if you want to support us, you can always donate to us through meetup.com. Meetup.com has partnered with Pledge, and Pledge is how we receive donations. So you can scan that QR code, or you can go to our our meetup.com page, and you'll see the donate here button. And we are a charitable. This is a charitable tax donation, so it can be written off and claimed on your taxes. And I do see the typo there. For those of you who are OCD like me, we'll get that fixed. All right, go ahead. Okay. At the end of this, we will be issuing what's known as a POAP, Proof of Attendance Protocol. They are an extremely awesome team, really great technology. Basically, at the end of this, Ryan will show you a QR code on screen, and all you'll have to do is pull out your phone, scan the QR code. You don't need a wallet or anything like that. You can register with your email address. And basically, you'll get this really cool coin in your wallet or in your POAP app by associating it with your wallet address or your email address. And it's a proof of your attendance here today, watching James talk about accessibility in Web3. James, on to the next one. All right, James, I'll send it off to you. Thanks, everybody, once again for attending. James, take it away. James, if you can't hear you. You're on mute.
Am I good now?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So before we jump into the actual slides, I'm going to give a quick background about myself and who I am, how I got here, and we'll just take it from there. So my name is James Warnken. Like Nick said, I am based out of Ohio. I just turned 25 earlier this summer. And when I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with a visual impairment called genetic retinal dystrophy. And I describe that as a sort of blend of being near and farsighted at the same time. So 12-point font, I can't really read it. And anything outside of about 10 feet starts to get blurry, and the colors and the details are not as clear. So with that said, I'm actually going to turn my camera off so I can see the slides, and we'll dive through. And we're really just going to scratch the surface on what accessibility is, how do we get ourselves into that mindset, and then what are some of the key things to consider, keep in mind, and remember as we continue to design, build, and develop things for the future. So we're going to start with laying the foundation. So where does the whole concept and everything around accessibility come from? Well, really started in the mid-1900s, now almost 70 years ago. And it piggybacked off of the social and civil rights movements that were taking place at that time. And up until this point, there really was no advocacy or anything really going on for access, education, public access, or anything of that nature for someone that was living with a disability. So we had this sort of movement start. We had people protesting, we had marches, we had sit-ins, we had all kinds of things that were happening at that time now coming out for people with disabilities, for inclusive and accessible design. So I always like to start with some of the physical world accommodations that we all see and interact with and use in our day-to-day lives that we may or may not think about all the time. So there's a ton of examples out there. Here are just a few. So the edge of the sidewalk where it has the tactile mats, those are a great example of a physical world accommodation. We have multi-height drinking fountains, we have elevators, we have fire alarms that have both an auditory and a visual component to them. And then we have automatic doors that are transparent, either totally transparent or from like the midpoint up, so that people with difficulty hearing can see through to the other side and sort of predict or understand what's on the other side of that door without it being jarring or shocking or unexpected. So we have a ton of these physical world accommodations that we all see, use, and interact with every day. And that really is the essence of the mindset, is how do we design things, whether it's in the physical world or the digital world, to be accessible and inclusive, to allow everyone to access and engage and really join in the conversation, the activity, the event, or whatever that looks like. So that's really the essence of everything. So a quick question or something to kind of think about as I continue through the slides is, what actually comes to mind when we hear the word digital accessibility? What type of features or design aspects or elements or adjustments or anything like that need to be made to take something that otherwise excludes groups of people or entire populations, and how do we make it so that that is able to be accessed and engaged by everyone in the same and equivalent way? So quick timeline on the laws and the different like regulations and guidelines that have come out around accessibility over time. As I mentioned, in the 1970s, we actually had the first piece of legislative that came out around people with disabilities, and it was called the Rehabilitation Acts. And over time, that developed, and in the 1990s, we got the Americans with Disability Act, which majority of people have heard of at least, or are vaguely familiar with it. But following suit from the 90s, we've just seen a lot of new developments come out, whether it was amending that original law, or it was something in terms of ICT products specifically, or travel and transportation. We've seen a ton of these develop over time. So it's always cool to go back and look at how things have developed over time and how quickly things have changed since the mark of the year 2000 to where we're at now in 2022, where things are just going to continue to build and develop and grow over time, so that the world digitally is more accessible and more inclusive to everyone. So when we're talking about the disability communities or anything along those lines, one thing that comes out in a lot of those deeper conversations are the theoretical models or the theories that back up different reasonings why accessibility is a challenge, is present, or why accessibility is an issue. And just running through a few of those quickly, we do have the medical model, which looked at it as more of a condition or something that needed to be treated, while the social model directly counteracts that and says that it's more a responsibility on society as a whole. And then we have the combination of the two. We have the economic model that dives into a person's ability to find gainful employment and what that whole scenario looks like when a disability is present versus when it's not. We have the functional solutions model, which is designing solutions that are functional, but they might or might not always be usable by someone with a disability. And then we have the social identity, which is a group of people with similar experiences coming together to advocate and find the resources and the tools and the things that allow them to access and engage. And then the charity model, which is looking at a disability as if it were something that we need to feel bad for someone, or as the name implies, charity. And with all of these models, they all come into play in different ways, whether it's in the products we build, the services we offer, the physical space, the digital space. They all sort of come into play, whether it's something that we're consciously aware of or not. And a lot of the times, the conversations that I have all seem to intertwine the functional solutions model and the social model to some extent, but others do come into that conversation periodically as well. So it's good to know where some of these ideologies come from, and they each have their own strengths and weaknesses as well. So when we are using the word disabilities as sort of an overarching term for the population, there are categories. Some lists have 14, some have 9, some have 11. It really just depends on who you're asking or who you're talking to. But generally speaking, the majority of the disabilities fit within the 9 categories listed here, starting with visual disabilities, auditory disabilities, speech disabilities, seizure, deaf blindness, cognitive, psychological, mobility, flexibility, and body structure, and then multiple or compound, which is a combination of 2 or more disabilities across any of the categories. I myself am in the visual disabilities, which we'll talk about the spectrum of disabilities here in a moment. But inside of each of these categories, there are a number of possible things that could be present. I am more along the lines of low vision, while somebody could be low vision and have a different degree of vision, or somebody could be totally blind or colorblind, or whatever that looks like for that individual person. It's just good to be aware of the different degrees and the different types that make up these categories. So it's not really a one size fits all when we're talking about a category or the different disabilities underneath of that. Now, before we jump into some of the characteristics, I always like to give a few statistics that shock people that have never really explored the space too much. In the US, it's said that about 1 in 4 adults live with some form of a disability at any time. And then as we look into the certain categories like visual, auditory, cognitive, or mobility, we can see sort of what percentage of the population that makes up, most of them being somewhere between 5 and 10%, with mobility being slightly higher, around 15% at any given time. So it might not seem at first thought like it's a very large population or group of people, but once you actually look at it compared to the national population or the global population, it is a significant number that we need to think about, we need to include, we need to consider in the conversations that we're having around what we're designing and building and publishing. And sort of building off of that, there are other factors or impacts that take place when someone has a disability or doesn't have a disability. And here's just a few of them. The sort of health factors that come with a disability and increased likelihood of certain things like smoking or heart disease or diabetes. Those tend to have a little bit higher likelihood among people with disabilities than not. And it's just something to add to the conversation and be mindful of as we're continuing through the rest of the slides. And then the final note here is that as age increases, the aging population with the aging demographic, whether it's a harder time seeing, trouble hearing, trouble moving around or getting up and down stairs, all of those tend to come into play as we get older and we pass that sort of 65 plus threshold. The chances and the likelihood for a disability or multiple disabilities goes up by about 40%, if not more. So we're not just benefiting and including people that are 25 with a visual disability in Ohio. We're also benefiting temporary disabilities, people of older age. There's a ton of great benefits and a very large population that sort of gets mixed in there as well. So circling back to breaking down disabilities and some of the characteristics that people may or may not be aware of. So starting here with the spectrum. So I mentioned that I'm low vision under the visual disability category. And what I have is called genetic retinal dystrophy. So if we were looking at it like a number line from 0 to 100, with 100 being completely blind, I'm right around like the 60 mark. The second example here is a gentleman named Scott who has macular degeneration. And what that is sort of like tunnel vision. So it's like looking through a peephole or a telescope with no or limited peripheral vision. Where he sits on that spectrum might vary from 50 to 75 to 80, but there is still some working vision. And then lastly, someone with like Cones and Rod's disease or something along those lines, they're going to be more towards that 100, but still able to perceive light and shadows and still have perception of color and light, whether it's black and white or shadows. Like if the lights are on in a room, that person would know. So it's very wide in the range of the spectrum of is what does low vision actually mean? It's different from person to person. It's not a one size fits all. And funnily enough, I tend to fit more into the invisible side of disability. So a lot of people, when I meet them in person, unless I tell them that I have a visual impairment, they would never know. And it's actually surprising to some people based on the things that I do, like having a cell phone or sitting at a laptop or skateboarding. Like anytime I talk about my hobbies, there's always a little bit of a wow or a surprising factor there. But not all disabilities are readily or apparent or visible upon just looking at somebody, hearing them talk or talking to them. I, for a while, tried to hide my disability as much as I possibly could because I didn't really like the questions and the curiosity in those conversations. And now that I'm a little bit older and a little bit more confident in myself, I'm a lot more open to telling people that I have a hard time seeing and answering those curious questions and being able to have a conversation to help people understand what life is like living with a visual disability online in the physical world, all of the above. So just like they're not all readily visible, not all disabilities are permanent. Some people might assume that they are, but if you fall and break your arm or you break your leg or you have a concussion, you're recovering from a surgery, that is considered to be a temporary disability because it limits your ability to complete daily activities, even though it's just for 6 to 8 weeks while you have a cast on or whatever that time frame looks like. There is a time frame set, whereas my visual impairment, there's no remedy, there's no cure, there's no resolution for that. So it is a permanent disability. So jumping into the conversation around the digital landscape and sort of the space we all live and work in on a day-to-day basis now, who are we really impacting when we're excluding or not thinking about accessibility, not including those conversations in our planning phase, in our design and our build and our beta testing, we're really impacting 4 categories there. We're impacting those with visual or the sight sense, the sound sense, touch, and cognitive. Now, cognitive isn't one of the 5 senses, but it is impacted. So the phrase that I always sort of turn back to is, if somebody can't see it, can they hear it? If somebody can't hear it, can they see it? If somebody can't use the traditional input methods like a mouse and keyboard, can they use alternatives? And then is the content delivered in a way that everybody can understand the goal, the purpose, or the expected outcome of that content, that page, that application, whatever they're trying to do? So it really boils down to 4 categories, and there's quite a lot to unpack there. So we're not going to get into a ton of the specifics today, but just know that those are sort of the 4 areas that we need to be asking ourselves questions, or our teams questions, about when we're planning and building and getting something ready for launch, or going back and retrofitting something that has previously been launched that may not be accessible. So before we dive into some of the guidelines and the ways that we verify and validate how we're being accessible, I want to quickly talk about the term public access, because in my opinion, if I can download an app, go to a website, if I can search for it in a search engine, if I can access it without a password or anything like that, then in my opinion, it is public access. Why would we not want to allow our websites or things that we're doing to be found in search engines? If I went to a store and they said, oh, only X, Y, and Z people are allowed in here, that's sort of the same thing that's happening when a website isn't accessible, and someone like myself who uses a magnifier comes along, and the website doesn't work with magnifier, I'm just going to go somewhere else. So it kind of is public access, unless it's like an intranet or something that's internal operations based, but generally speaking, our forward-facing assets and components need to be readily accessible with assistive technology and user preference and settings. There are a few industries that are sort of outlined as who needs to be readily accessible, and a lot of these are just your general service providers, retailers, food and drink services, lodging, exhibition and entertainment. But those are very broad and a little bit vague, so it's hard to pinpoint who exactly fits into some of those and whether or not they fit into one more than the other. I just, general rule of thumb, if I can get to it without a password, it should be accessible. So what are assistive technologies? Assistive technologies are tools, softwares, and resources that allow people with different disabilities or different abilities to access and engage the content. So earlier on, when I said, if we can't see it, can we hear it? All of these icons here are what's called a screen reader, and they basically turn the text into audio. So if I were to go over this slide, it would say, or read out loud to me, assistive technology examples, heading level 1. So it not only tells me what the content is, but it also tells me, is this heading level 1? Is it an image? Is it a button? Is it a link? It announces a ton of additional details to help sort of piece all of the puzzle pieces together when the visual formatting and styling and layouts can't be perceived through visual means. Likewise, we have captions on audio for people with difficulty hearing. Many people use captions while they're watching videos, whether it's due to a noisy environment or personal preference or whatever that looks like. Captions have become pretty universal. It's not something that is often thought about as only benefiting people with difficulty hearing. And then when we get to people with limited dexterity or mobility, we have things like sip and puff devices, push-pull press switches, we have speech to text, we have text to speech, we have a ton of amazing softwares and tools and resources out there that allow us to customize our own experiences now, and making sure that what we're building and designing works with those technologies is vital to becoming accessible and inclusive. So if something works with only one type of screen reader, we're only allowing the population that uses that specific type of software to now access and engage, while excluding all of the other ones, which is very unlikely because a lot of these do work the same. For example, the voiceover one in the top right and the one to the left of it for TalkBack, those are mobile screen readers built right into the devices. They work very similarly. One is just built for Android and one is just built for iOS. So typically, if we make something accessible to the voiceover screen reader, it's going to work fairly the same for the most part on an Android device as well. So there are some differences, but generally speaking, we just want to make sure that we're including as many of those tools and assistive technologies as possible, so that a user can pick and choose which assistive technology they want to use to access and engage, without directly excluding certain groups of people or assistive technologies. So what does assistive technology do? It basically allows someone like myself to access and engage and do whatever we want online, whether that's filing our taxes, shopping, booking vacations, education and learning, employment. Generally speaking, assistive technology allows us to do all of those things without a complete barrier or something saying, no, you can't do that. Now, it does depend and vary based on how accessible the website we're shopping on is, but there's a ton of shopping options out there. If one isn't accessible to my set of preferences or needs, I can just go to another one and continue to shop and search, because I have basically unlimited options with the power that is in my phone or my computer at my desk. So the guidelines that generally we follow when we want to test and see how accessible something is, outside of bringing someone in to test for us, we follow what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they're broken up into four main principles. So we have the perceivable principle, which is making sure that all users can perceive the information through the senses. We have operable. Does the functionality work across user devices and agents and assistive technologies? Understandable. Is the content presented in a way that a user can understand? And then finally, robust, with does it work across different operating systems and browsers? And if I switch from one screen reader to another, does it still work the same? And underneath each of these four main principles, we have guidelines that are the basic and broad goals that we work towards to ensure that what we're publishing is accessible. And how we do that is with the use of the success criteria that corresponds. And those are broken up into 3 different levels. So if you hear somebody say, I'm WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, that means that they have satisfied all of the single A criteria and all of the AA criteria. The highest level of conformance there would be AAA, which is primarily for like government and government agencies. Generally speaking, around the world, the standard right now is WCAG 2.1 AA. So when we're doing a website, an application, a document, whatever that looks like, we just want to make sure that we're satisfying all of the single and AA criteria. And a lot of those AAA are just extensions of the AA criteria. For example, a AA criteria says that we need to have captions on all pre-recorded audio. The AAA version of that is captions on live audio. So they really just are building blocks on one another in most instances for the AAA. I will note that 2.2 the version 2.2 is going to be releasing in the near future, hopefully, which includes some new success criteria, primarily focusing around the cognitive disabilities and mobile usability, which are not very clearly defined or covered under the current version. So we do have some new ones coming, and I'm sure as things continue to develop and advance and grow, there will be new ones coming out. So always just make sure that you're on either the latest or the version right before the latest, in terms of which success criteria you're checking against and what level you're trying to conform with. Right now, 2.1 is the current version, 2.0 is the most recent version before that. So when it comes to testing for accessibility, we have what are called automated scans and checkers. And these automated tools are very useful in getting a good foundational understanding of how accessible something is just from where it's currently at. So we have things like Andy, we have the Wave Accessibility Evaluator, we have the Color Contrast Checker by WebAIM, we have the AXDev tools. All of these give a different outputs, whether it's checking to make sure that the colors that we use across our pages or our app have a high enough ratio for somebody who's low vision or colorblind. Andy, Wave, and AXDev tools are more on the tech side, letting us know more in more of a quantitative way how much or how little accessibility there is in what we're doing. So it can tell us there's 15 images that are missing alternative text, but a lot of these tools cannot tell you how good the alternative text is on the rest of your images. So in terms of quality, the automated scans are not going to do it all for you. They're typically going to check between 30 to 40%, which leaves a 60% gap where users who use assistive technology, or someone like myself that's sort of in between with lived experience with assistive technology and a background in accessibility, bringing people like that in to review and analyze and provide feedback is what's going to allow that website, document, application to really move up towards that next degree of accessible design, outside of just checking all of the boxes in one of these tools. That's a good start, but you're not going to get all the way there without bringing a real person into the conversation and allowing them to provide feedback, and then taking that feedback and doing something constructive with it to make adjustments, to retrofit or adjust a future design if it's early on in the planning phase of the project or whatever that looks like. And then if anyone here wants to browse or peruse through some of the tools, there is a comprehensive list of these tools available on the W3C website, which is where a lot of the WCAG guidelines and a lot of super valuable content can be found on the W3C site. The 4 tools here are just the 4 main ones that I encounter and use myself on a pretty consistent basis. So additional benefits of being accessible. So a lot of people pose the question or sort of try to combat the topic of accessibility because they aren't aware of some of the additional benefits. They think it costs too much money, it takes too much time, there's not enough bandwidth, but in all reality, it can become a part of that process and the standard flow of business within an organization. And when we are accessible, we do experience several outcomes. The first one being enhanced search engine optimization. So all of us are chasing that #1 position inside of the search engines for exposure, for clout, whatever that looks like. And when we're more accessible, we have a lot better of a user experience, and that ultimately leads to higher performance there, but also more accurate analytics. If somebody comes to your website and is immediately blocked or challenged, their assistive technology isn't working, they're going to leave because it's not worth it to try to figure out what's broken or what's wrong or what the issue is, which leads to increased bounces and lower session durations, and analytics like that really take a hit in that standpoint. So we get enhanced SEO, we get more clear analytics. We also get an increased audience and market segment size. So earlier in the presentation, we saw about 1 in 4. If we were to take an existing audience and add 25% to that, that's essentially what we're opening up when our products and services are readily accessible. And then lastly, we get a little bit of a competitive advantage with faster innovation and more advancement. There aren't too many companies that are publicly owning accessibility outside of some of the corporate giants and things like that. But ultimately, when people with disabilities are included in the conversation, when the entire project has that level of accessibility thought and baked into the process, we can move a lot quicker. We don't have to go back and check. We don't have to go back and retrofit. It creates a faster moving process that's overall more robust, so that we can spend that additional time. Instead of spending time fixing, we can spend that time coming up with additional features and benefits, and how do we make things better or push things along in a faster, more efficient and effective way. So it's not all super technical. It doesn't all revolve around the code and the actual build. And in all honesty, it's fun. If you're someone who likes a little bit of a creative challenge, then accessibility should be something to challenge yourself with from time to time, and think, how can I do this in a way that everyone or more people are going to be able to enjoy what our team is doing. Social media is a prime example of that. We have 4 main types of content on social media. We have text, we have audio, we have video, and then we have images. If somebody can't see an image, and with the way social medias are built, they're not all super accessible by default. So if someone can't see an image, typically we would add alt text to that on a website, but we can add a text caption describing that image. Or if we post a podcast episode and we want that to be accessible to people with difficulty hearing, we can add a text transcript to that. With video, there's a little bit more there to unpack, because if somebody can't see the video, then we want to add what's called audio descriptions. And that really is an art style in and of itself, knowing where to fit those descriptive phrases and pieces in the breaks and dialogue. It is really a challenge for the general content creator, but it is an option. So the different ways that we can piece and puzzle things together, the more of them we can sort of stack on top of each other or provide alternatives for, the more accessible, the larger audience we have the potential to reach and engage with. If we limit ourselves to just images with no captions, we're excluding an entire population. If we post audio with no text alternative, again, we're excluding people without knowing it or being conscious of it all the time. Now that we're conscious of it, we can start to challenge ourselves and say, how can we provide this in a way that's the same equivalent experience, regardless of whether or not the person holding the phone can see, hear, or any of those things. So it really can be a fun, creative challenge. And with that, it's not all super technical. It's not all code. It's not something that has to be done in the back end. And it's not something that takes a ton of time in the development process. So typically when we develop and include accessibility from the very early conversations all the way through when we're adding updates and maintaining and fixing and debugging, if accessibility is a part of that process, it's not going to be some crazy over the top project that throws the entire organization off. It's just going to weave itself into the conversations and make the product that much better once we launch version 1.0 or we update to version 14.5. If accessibility is in that from start to finish, it doesn't require extra time or bandwidth or anything outside of maybe 1 to 5%, which in the grand scheme of things is typically pretty minuscule. And just kind of building off of that, it really is a team effort. So if you don't have the answer for a question, that's why we work as teams. That's why we collaborate. Is if I don't know the answer, I have team members that are more creative and quicker on their feet, and they think in different ways. And if I were to pose that same question to them, chances are they have a different idea or a different approach on how to integrate a feature that is more accessible, or how to build something that works with a larger group of users. So it really is all about that collaboration, that teamwork from top to bottom, inside and out, with the leadership team all the way down to the developers, from the customers to the customer relationship management. It really is just a big team effort from the users in, letting the teams know what assistive technologies they're currently using, because they update just like our phones and our computers do. Those assistive devices update all the time. So understanding that from the user perspective, understanding the capabilities and the bandwidth of the development team, the leadership team, really pushing for a better, more accessible product upon delivery or on the next update. It really just takes everyone being committed and being driven towards opening the doors for an equivalent experience for everyone. And just to sort of put things into a little bit of perspective, look how far and how widely things have changed over the last 2 years, from working, you're required to be in the office 40 hours a week, to now you only have to come in maybe 2 or 3 days a week, to entire teams like mine being remote. So whether we're sitting across the table from each other, we're on a phone call, on a virtual meeting, we're talking through direct messages on social media, all of those communications are open. And that is really what allows us to collaborate and work with organizations across different states. I'm in Ohio. Nick and the rest of the team are in Texas. Across the globe, I've talked with teams in China, teams in New Zealand, and it really is very easy to collaborate in this exact day and time, whether someone is 12 hours ahead of me or 6 hours behind. I personally am very flexible because this is my passion. I want to see things continue to move and advance in a way that leads to an equivalent experience, not just for my generation, but for the Gen Zs that follow me, for the generations that follow them. We have the opportunity to really set that example and set the stage for how things can be done in an accessible way that doesn't fit or fall into that stereotypical loop of it takes too much time, it costs too much money, we don't have the bandwidth. If we all just work together on it, it's not something that is impossible by any means, and the opportunities really are endless. So that is just a quick scratching the surface on digital accessibility and sort of what gets packed into that. And if anyone does want to continue the conversation, if questions popped up that you don't want to put in the chat, if there's ideas that you're considering or your team are having trouble navigating or fleshing out, feel free to send me an email, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, any way that you can get a hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, my email is always open for those collaborative efforts, those ideas, those questions. I'm always here for it. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. So I'm going to ask the team to let me know if there are any questions that we can dive into in our remaining 15-ish minutes.
Yeah, no, awesome. James, I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the value provided during the call. Is definitely an extremely important topic to cover. So yeah, I greatly appreciate everything you've done. So yeah, if there's any questions, go ahead and post them in the comment section, or let me share my screen a second. So what we're gonna do, sorry, 1 second, let me, okay. So yeah, is my screen showing up there, James?
I cannot see your screen.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, how about now?
No, I still can't see it.
Okay, sorry, bear with me 1 second, and the usual technical difficulties. Okay, how about now there, James?
No, I still can't see it.
Okay.
You might have to select the window or the tab that you're trying to share.
Okay. I'll tell you what, can you open the, can you share your screen back and open the website?
The Web3.
Yeah, the website.
Yep, let me get it open. Can you see my screen?
All right. So yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties. Yeah, if be sure to check out our website, web3tx.org, and if anybody has any questions or anything after the call, can you scroll down to the bottom of the page? Go ahead and or a little bit up. Just go ahead and submit it there. So if you have any other questions or anything after the call, be sure to connect with us there. And hey, James, I also sent you a link.
Email or? Gotcha. Let me switch over.
So like what we talked about earlier, we have a POAP. So James is pulling up the POAP. It'll be a QR code, so you can go ahead and get your phones ready.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, be sure to connect with James on any socials, and anything that you have any questions for, definitely reach out to us for anything else. And feel free to either screenshot, scan the QR code, and definitely claim your free POAP.
Perfect. Were there any questions that came through, or?
I'm not seeing too many, or I'm not seeing anything. So yeah, well, like we said, greatly appreciate your time. We'll just kind of keep this QR code up for a couple minutes. But yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for coming out, and definitely connect with us on social media. Check out our website, web3tx.org, and we'd love to see everybody out at our future events and other live streams that we do. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good Tuesday evening.
Oh, so I see a question. First question, Instagram. Are you there, James?
Yep.
Yep. The first question. Instagram automatically generates alt text for your posts, right? Right. But it often does not capture a full context at the description of the image in a post. You have the option to write your own alt text to be more accurate, describe your photo or video, but how good is the auto generator in comparison to the manual entry?
I would say it does a decent job. Most users would kind of assume that Instagram is more of that photo heavy social media app. So there is a little bit more detail to attention paid there. I would always, as the author of the post, put your own alt text, or I've seen people just putting the image description in the actual caption of the post so that they know as the author that description is available to everyone. So you kind of have two options there, whether you want to put it, attach it as alt text to the image, or you want to just put it in the image description. The auto generated alt text, from what I've heard and what I've seen, is fairly decent, but as the author, we're going to know more about that than an AI or anybody else really would.
Great. Thanks, Rob, for the question. And yeah, like I said, we'll just kind of keep this QR code up, and we'll be ending the broadcast soon. I definitely appreciate y'all's coming out. Oh, got another question. We know as a screen read translates an image, meaning via its alt text, and emojis are also read through a type of alt text. But I heard if you put the emojis all together with no spacing, it becomes harder to read. Is this the case?
Emojis are a tricky area to navigate because it does just read the emoji, which sometimes means it's hard to get the context. I've seen on Twitter specifically people who substitute letters out with emojis, and it disrupts, and it will read the first half of the word and then tell what the emoji is and then finish the rest of the word. And breaking the word up like that does make it a lot more difficult to understand. But generally speaking, the rate at which a speed reader or a screen reader reads is dictated by the user settings. When they're all side by side with no spacing, there's really no pause between them. So it might appear like they all just run together as one like consecutive thing, which could make it very hard to determine the differences or understand the context of it, if they're all different or if they're all like the same or alternating, whatever that pattern that somebody or as the author was going for, it may not translate as well to a screen reader who's just hearing jack-o'-lantern instead of seeing the pumpkin emoji. So I would just, the emojis are a tricky way to navigate, but they do read them. It's just not always the most context in terms of the content.
Great. I appreciate that. No. Yeah, thanks, Rob. So yeah, guys, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Definitely want to keep it right at an hour. So any last minute questions, definitely connect with us on our website. And yeah, we'll be ending the broadcast. I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing anybody soon.